Amidst a rampant civil war across the country, the president addresses the nation and anticipates an imminent victory. Welcoming the Western forces comprising of California and Texas back into the nation, he mentions that they can again be a united country as before as soon as the illegal secessionist government is deposed. The next morning, war photographer Lee Smith arrives at the site of a riot in New York City with her colleague Joel. Tensions run high as the police try to tackle the crowd, amongst which Lee spots a young photographer, Jessie Cullen, struggling to stand her ground. When Lee grabs her, Jessie is starstruck as she notices that she was rescued by one of her heroes. However, an explosive going off suddenly in the vicinity escalates matters even as Lee ensures Jessie's safety. Undeterred by the explosion, Lee soon begins documenting the aftermath, compelling a shaken Jessie to save a memory for herself. Later that evening, Lee and Joel discuss their plans to get to Washington, D.C. with their elderly mentor, Sammy. Insisting that she wasn't going to the front line, Lee states that she intends to photograph the president while Joel gets an interview with him. With the obvious threat of the Western forces to the capital, Sammy tries to convince them to drop their insane plan when Joel mentions that the president has not been interviewed for 14 months. Wanting to be the one to successfully interview him before it is too late, however, Joel is adamant about their plan. Knowing that the capital cannot be accessed easily anymore, Sammy insists on accompanying them on their way to Charlottesville, Virginia, where he would like to join the front line instead. While Joel is reluctant to let Sammy join them because of his age, Lee accepts giving him a ride before calling it a night. She meets Jessie in the hotel's lobby, who thanks her for the help earlier and mentions that Lee shares the same name as another of her revered war photographers, Lee Miller. Already knowing the fact, Lee graciously accepts Jessie's gratitude and then takes her leave. By herself later, she is haunted by the torture and inhumanity she has witnessed due to her work over the years as a war photographer. Early the next morning, Lee finds out that Joel met Jessie the previous night and has allowed her to accompany them on their journey. Reluctant to agree to the youngster coming along, Lee states that Jessie cannot go further than Charlottesville, where they will be dropping Sammy off. Navigating through a massive pile-up on their way a while later, they cautiously proceed further through a checkpoint. Coming upon a gas station on their way, they decide to refuel while they have a chance and notice that the place is under the protection of a few armed men. Knowing that the almost worthless American currency would not get them fuel, Lee offers to pay in Canadian dollars to make a successful deal instead. Meanwhile, curiosity gets Jessie to come across two alleged looters being tortured at the car wash adjacent to the gas station. Having followed her there, Lee steps in to save Jessie from having to decide their fates and suggests getting a photograph of the victims with their captor. Back on the road, Jessie is disappointed in herself for neither thinking of taking a picture nor having the courage to save the victims' lives. Practical as ever, Lee reminds her that as a photographer, their job is not to overthink about incorrect human behavior, but instead to simply capture everything they come across to enable the right people to ask the right questions later. Pulling over in an abandoned town a while later, Lee gets Jessie to take pictures of a crashed helicopter to further test her mental strength. When Jessie apologizes for tagging along, she is told that there can be only one result of having an inexperienced youngster in the middle of a war. Intrigued, Jessie asks Lee to take a picture of when she inevitably meets her end. Later, the group takes a break for the night when Sammy reminds Lee of her initial days as a young photographer and states that she wasn't all that different from Jessie. Bringing her attention to the ongoing gunfire nearby, Joel is promised a visit there the next morning. Along with Sammy and Jessie, Joel gets some rest for the night. As their luck would have it, the combat still continues into the next day, allowing them to document a takeover attempt by the secessionist militia. Keeping Jessie close for her safety, Joel also ensures that she gets good shots of the fight. In her true element, Lee does well to get enough shots for herself while also recognizing Jessie's efforts to get the job done despite being scared. They soon cautiously follow the secessionist militia into a building headed by the Loyalists. Jessie observes with bated breath as the militia successfully takes over control of the building and meticulously documents the remainder of the executions that take place. Later that evening, the group arrives at a stadium-turned-refugee camp 289 miles out of Washington, D.C. to spend the night. Impressed by Jessie's dedication to immediately develop her negatives, Lee opens up about the lesser-known facts about her life, other than being the youngest ever photographer of the Magnum Photos Cooperative. Much like Jessie's father, Lee's folks are also on a farm, she says, trying to ignore the war. Looking at the pictures the youngster has managed to capture during the heated moments of the confrontation they witnessed earlier, she even appreciates Jessie's efforts before joining the rest of the crew. The next morning, they surprisingly come across a town where they find several residents going about their day as usual, as if they are trying to pretend like the war doesn't exist, as confirmed by a shop owner. In a faint sense of normalcy, Jessie urges Lee to try on a dress, and even takes a few pictures once she changes into it. On the other hand, she declines Joel's request to get a photograph of him with his new hat, implying Jessie's budding friendship with her idol. Leaving the shop later, Sammy brings Lee's attention to the town being under the watchful guard of armed men situated on rooftops and states that they wouldn't have been able to reside here in these circumstances, even if they wanted to ignore the war. Getting back on the road, they come across the remains of a Christmas fair. Choosing to drive through what seems to be a ghost town, they suddenly find themselves amid a sniper attack. Showing tremendous improvement, Jesse promptly follows Joel and Lee outside to try and get pictures. Joel speaks to a spotter and refuses to believe that they are just attacking without knowing whose side their opponents are on. Meanwhile, Jesse gets better at simply clicking pictures without being affected by the activities of the snipers. Once the opponents are eliminated, the group gets to safely pass through town. While Joel and Jesse catch some much-needed sleep, Lee drives them ahead only to suddenly notice another car behind them driving rashly. Sammy gets Lee to slow down enough for the car to pass them, but the occupants of the car seem to have no such intentions. Instead, their repeated loud honks wake Joel, and he immediately recognizes the two fellow reporters Tony and Bohai, whom they had met in New York earlier. Fed up for being around Bohai and his rash driving all this time, Tony decides to switch cars while both vehicles keep going at a steady pace. Inspired by this switch, Jesse chooses to do the same and manages to go over to Bohai, who promptly speeds up and drives ahead. Worried about Jesse when she doesn't see the other car for quite a while, Lee is distracted just as she finds herself in the path of an oncoming truck. Swerving into the woods to avoid getting hit, she then hurriedly maneuvers the car back on the road and rushes ahead. Eventually catching up to Bohai's car, abandoned at the side of the road, Lee decides to go looking for Jesse. Discreetly spying through her camera, Lee spots Bohai and Jesse held at gunpoint by a squad of militia who are burying corpses in a mass grave. Agreeing to leave Sammy behind for his own safety, Lee, Joel, and Tony approach the group to try and save Bohai and Jesse. However, the negotiation goes sideways when Bohai is shot before everyone is asked where they are from. Satisfied about Joel, Jesse, and Lee's American origins, the leader of the militia group then moves on to Tony, who is still struggling with Bohai's loss. The moment he answers that he is from Hong Kong, he is shot to his end for not being American. Having witnessed enough, Sammy rams their vehicle into the members of the militia in an attempt to surprise them and save the others. However, Jesse ends up getting flung into the dug-up mass grave. Struggling to get out, she is pulled up by Joel and urged into their car along with Lee as Sammy rushes to drive away. They are shot at during their escape, but Sammy keeps driving while Joel and Jesse try to process what they just witnessed. A little distance away, Sammy reveals that he is fatally hit and needs to stop driving. Carefully shifting him to the back seat, Joel takes over the driving, but gravely injured as he is, Sammy soon breathes his last. Eventually, arriving at the military base of the Western Forces in Charlottesville, Lee deletes a photo she took of Sammy after his passing. She then finds Joel with a couple of other colleagues from the media and learns that the government has surrendered, which leaves the capital undefended except for a few loyal soldiers and the Secret Service. With the path to the capital pretty much clear for the Western Forces, Joel is disappointed that they did not manage to get there in time and also mentions that Sammy possibly lost his life for no good reason. Coming to terms with her own grief, Lee then meets Jesse, who is also finding it difficult to deal with losing Sammy. She tells Lee, however, that despite the last few days being the scariest of her life, they have strangely made her feel the most alive as well. A while later, Joel finds Lee scrubbing Sammy's seat in their vehicle, even as the might of the Western Forces departs to eventually descend on Washington, D.C. Joining the troops that evening, Lee, Jesse, and Joel witness the assault at the White House. While Jesse repeatedly attempts to get risky shots of the rapidly deteriorating situation, Lee simply watches. Through the progress of the Western Forces, Jesse continues to document as much as she can while Joel urges a fatigued Lee ahead. Attempting to breach the perimeter of the White House puts them in danger as the group slowly makes its way ahead, but an undeterred Jesse keeps getting pictures. With both sides refusing to fall back, more plans are formulated even as Lee reminds Jesse to stay low. She, nevertheless, continues to make steady progress ahead with the troops, leaving Joel to ensure that Lee joins them on their way. However, Lee continues to struggle with the endless gunfire at the fortified perimeter of the White House. With an eventual successful breach, the Western forces proceed to surround the White House, and Jesse's camera clicks away at the history being made. Just as Joel gets the information that the head of their nation's inevitable fate is possibly sealed, the president is spotted trying to flee the White House in a limousine. Right at the breached perimeter is where all the action unfolds as the president's security is busted, leaving the presidential limousine on its own to deal with the escape. Watching it crash, followed by the Western forces taking out the driver, Lee's mind thinks of a plan. As the limousine gets further attacked, she realizes that the attempted escape must have been a distraction and proceeds towards the White House instead. Unsure about missing the opportunity to capture the perfect shot of the limousine, Jesse still joins Joel to accompany Lee. Her hunch is proven right when the occupants of the limousine are shot and the president is nowhere to be found. A few soldiers of the Western forces then leave the perimeter and follow Lee, Joel, and Jesse to the White House. Left completely undefended, the trio is easily able to enter the place, only to find it seemingly abandoned. As they proceed further inside, the soldiers of the Western forces get there and ask them to stay out of their way to avoid getting in trouble as they cautiously make their way through. Following the sound of gunfire then, Lee leads Jesse and Joel deeper into the White House. Coming upon an unarmed agent of the Secret Service, Lee takes a picture of the agent's negotiation proceedings with the Western forces. However, the negotiation proves to be fruitless since the Western forces are not willing to let the president flee to a neutral country like Alaska or Greenland. Taking the agent down, they move ahead to deal with the remainder of the Secret Service, with both sides opening fire. Jessie hurries ahead to ensure that she captures all the action, and Lee also takes several shots of the shootout. Proceeding further towards the president's office, the troops continue to decimate the Secret Service while both Lee and Jessie keep taking pictures. Eventually, Jessie steps into the line of fire for a better shot, and Lee forces her to stay down. However, she gets fatally shot in the process instead, which Jessie witnesses through her camera. The troops progress ahead, followed by Joel, and finally by a thoroughly shaken Jessie. Finally, at the president's office, the troops drag him out from his hiding place. About to execute him, they are then stopped by Joel, who insists on getting at least a quote from the president. At the very end of his wits, the president cannot say much more than pleading for his life, which satisfies Joel. Jessie, on the other hand, captures the execution of the president like a hardened professional, which would certainly have made Lee immensely proud of her protege. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay awesome and take care.